First of all, let me introduce Brian to you. Brian has been in a few of our earlier webinars. And I have been, I'm honored to be part of his organization, Coach Source, which is possibly the largest coaching organization in the world. Brian just updated me that he has now about 1,100 executive coaches. And you really have to go to his website to see the caliber of these people. And they are from 100 different countries. And as far as I remember, and as he remembers, they speak over 50 languages. So pretty much anybody who wants in any part of the world for any company, Brian is the go-to person if they are looking for executive coaches. The reason that we always like to have Brian here is, on the one hand, we have, like you have already seen, people like Cindy, Fiona, Janet, master coaches who come there and speak about skills, awareness, and all that stuff, which is extremely important for our professional development and personal development as well. Brian brings about a very deep knowledge about the industry coach interface, as it were, in order for the coaches to understand what's really happening around. What are the trends in the corporate space today? Because many of us here in this forum are likely to be executive coaches or wanting to be executive coaches. What are the trends that are happening in this space? What is it that coaches need to equip themselves in order to be effectively be selected? Because the filtering process in terms of large companies selecting coaches is in fact a pretty rigorous one. And these are some of the things that I requested Brian to touch upon. And very recently, Brian's company, Coach Source, conducted a survey. And I think it is as important as a survey that has been conducted by ACF and other credentialing agencies. It covered not only just all the coaches, but also the companies and many other people. And Brian would briefly touch upon it. He's not going to go into in detail. So in a sense, this presentation is going to be Brian, whenever he chooses to present some of the findings from the survey, and from there move on to what is that the current trends are, what is it that companies expect of coaches, and then perhaps then answer some questions that come up from you as to what you each individually can do towards sort of preparing yourself as coaches to be sought after by clients, sponsoring companies. So Brian, over to you. All my function from now on would be to read out from the chat box as to what questions come up. Thank you. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And greetings, everybody. I'm transmitting to you from Silicon Valley. I am near San Jose, or about an hour south of San Francisco in Northern California. It's a little early for us, about 7 a.m. or so. And I'm very excited to be joining you for Coaching Week, International Coaching Week. I have some slides from the research study we conducted, but we'll also have a dialogue and take questions and so forth. But just to get us warmed up and started, I actually want to give you a little history of one of my early days in this coaching field. And I have been in the field about 22 years, and that's a long time because coaching is very new, honestly. In fact, when I first started, I started working with Marshall Goldsmith, who is speaking, of course, during this week of coaching. And I came to him as a graduate student. And when I arrived, we were doing thousands of 1-hour coaching feedback sessions. So we would get someone's 360 feedback report and then sit down with them on the phone or in person and then go over that report for 1 hour, and that was it. And we were doing thousands of those every year. So one day I walk into his office and he's talking to the head of marketing for a cell phone manufacturer. And the cell phone company was kind of interested in this coaching thing. And she said to him, I loved it when you met with me for that 1 hour, but I want to do more of that. 1 hour is not enough, which actually someone just said in the chat room here. 1 hour is not enough. I want to do more of this coaching thing. could you do 6 months of this or 1 year? And Marshall said, sure, we could do that. And I was here listening to this, excited, because this sounded really interesting to me. But then she said, okay, well, if we do this for a year, what are we going to do? How are we going to spend our time for a whole year? And I was watching Marshall to see what he would say, because we've never done this before. And he literally looks over at me and says, oh, my colleague Brian Underhill just walked in the room. Brian, what are we going to do with her and her team for the next year if we were to coach them? And I had no idea what to say at that point. So we sort of figured it out, honestly. We just figured it out and started doing more and more coaching that would last longer and longer. And today we actually don't do a year of coaching. We do about 6 months each time. And, you know, I didn't realize at the time that it was really kind of the beginning of what would become an industry. And so from that point on, one of my interests became researching what was happening in the coaching industry. And that's part of what I'm here to share with you today, is the research that we just conducted. And of course, it's about 80 pages or something, so I'm only going to pick a few highlights for today. But we have a long history of this research. We did it in 2005. We wrote a book. We did it in 2013, and then we've just repeated it in 2018. And to give you a little further background, as Ram mentioned, we actually asked not just executive coaches, but we actually took a 4-dimensional perspective. One of the quite interesting groups were companies who hire coaches. So generally there are large companies who hire coaches. So we would have about 100 of them. So the person who generally was in charge of coaching at that company would complete our survey. We then asked internal coaches. So about 117 of those, they're internal to a company. So they generally work full-time for maybe the large company, and then they coach within that company. It's a newer trend in our field that's been emerging over the last maybe 10 years. And then external executive coaches, which perhaps might be many of the folks in this webinar. We had a huge number of them, over 650. But then the last group was my favorite. And this is where we actually we surveyed real living, breathing executives who have hired coaches themselves to see what they would say about our industry. One other thing, though, to mention is the survey was a lot more North American than we might have wanted. So it was about 70% of the respondents were from generally the US, and then 20 from Europe, Middle East, Africa, EMEA, about 10 from Asia. So it wasn't the largest survey for those of you who are in Asia, and you would, of course, want to take that into account when you're considering our results. That we're pretty slanted towards the United States. Now, we did ask companies to predict trends for the next few years. And one of the trends we asked about was, would there be more use of external executive coaching? 80% of the companies felt that there would be. On our 7-point scale, they checked the number 6 and the number 7. 80%, that's quite good, actually. We asked the same question of external coaches, and external coaches were even slightly more enthusiastic about the upcoming likelihood of more external coaching. We asked companies whether they used more or less coaches over the past 2 years. And you can see in this graphic, about 60% of them used more coaches, external executive coaches, 60%, and 22% were already using coaches, and they were planning to continue their current use of coaches. 18% said they had actually decreased their use of coaching. But then we said, what about the next 2 years? What are your company's plans for the next 2 years? And in this case, the numbers get better, where 56% expect to increase their use, the rest at least continue what they're doing now. And no companies planned to decrease their use of coaching. One more question, and then Ram, I'd love to hear if you have any inquiries from our audience. We asked our participants about different kinds of coaching: team coaching, group coaching, internal coaching. And we asked about the likelihood of all of these types of coaching over the next 3 to 5 years. And 63% or more of the raters felt that all of these types of coaching are likely or highly likely over the next 3 to 5 years. So it seems to us that not only is executive coaching expected to increase, that we also see other types of coaching that are probably likely to continue to emerge in our field. And this does match our own experience at CoachSource, where our own company revenues have grown in double digits ever since we had the economic downturn. I will say the last year was not a double digit. It was actually quite slow. It was still growth, but it just wasn't what we were used to. But having said that, every coaches I talk to and so forth, I get the impression that coaches are either as busy as they were before or perhaps even busier. So it seems like things might be good for our industry, Ram. I don't know if you have any questions or response to this first batch of data here. But at least what we're seeing in the States is a lot of growth in this industry. And I would expect you probably might say something similar for what you see in India.
Yeah, I'll come to that. A couple of questions that have come up. Michael had asked whether people can access this report. You can answer that later. And are there's something about what levels at which coaching is being conducted in organizations, and how soon do companies want to have results, evidence from the coaching itself?
Okay.
And Anuradha has asked a question about one-to-many coaching, the team coaching, group coaching, whatever. And there are many. I mean, you can start answering, and then I could pick up those questions and come back to you. And if any of them want to raise their hands, we'll put them on the panel. Yeah.
Yeah, so I will come at the end of how you can get the report. It is on the CoachSource website for sale. However, I'll tell you at the end ways that you can eventually get it for free. So it just depends on your timing, how fast you'd like it. Another question had to do with, sorry, you have read about 2 or 3. The second one
was about the levels at which
levels.
Is being conducted, and then how soon organizations would like to see results. And then there was one on team coaching. Okay.
So levels of, in our research, we focused on executive, and then we defined executive for our raters. And we generally mentioned that to be roughly what might be a director level, and then up from there within the organization: director, vice president, the higher vice presidents, C-level or managing director, and so forth, even the board. Our research found that the vast majority, not the vast majority, but director and vice president were really the levels where the most coaching was occurring. And I actually don't remember this very second whether it was director or vice president, which was more. But surprisingly, there's a drop-off when you get above vice president. Fewer leaders at that level seem to be working with a coach. And if they weren't always, they weren't willing to talk publicly about their coaching as much as we might wish them to do. There was a question about how soon would someone expect to see results. That's an interesting one. We generally feel like we're given a pretty good 6-month window because that's how long the assignment is. And, so generally so long as we get some results by the end of the 6 months, most of our clients will be satisfied. However, we do have some people that are in precarious situations and their company would like to see results much faster. Sometimes they've given us 3 months, or even a bit less. But I will say, when a company says, we need to see some change in the next couple of weeks, or we might have to let this person go, that would be of concern to us, because we find that coaching very often is used for the best and the brightest more than it is for someone in big trouble. And that basically tells us that this person's in big trouble, because they're only allowing, a few weeks for change to happen. And team coaching, I can come back to in just a little bit.
Yeah, these questions are actually on the chat box if you want to look at it.
Yeah.
And one of the questions is the question that we had talked about several times, about the professionalization of coaching, or the credentialing of coaching. I remember that 5 or 6 years ago when we met and we talked about it, it was a different picture. And now, as you yourself found, and you are training all your coaches into ICF credentials, it's changing. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So you if you were here at my opening story, for those that were, I started with Marshall Goldsmith, and when we started in 1997, when I started to work for him, we had never heard of ICF or anything like that. It wasn't until many years later that we would have even heard of something like a certified coach. So we were just kind of figuring this out as we went along. And then for many years, we didn't have a whole lot of need or interest in something like what ICF was doing. And never would our clients ask for a credentialed coach or anything like that. Then over the past many years, ICF has done a wonderful job of reaching out and connecting more with external executive coaches, and clients of ours have started to ask for credentialed coaches. And I'll get to some more of that in a little bit. Enough to the point where many of us who'd been doing coaching for quite a long time and honestly didn't have much need, we thought, for something like ICF, we're starting to see clients asking for credentialed coaches. And that's where we started to say, well, that's where the marketplace is going. We should probably start to take this seriously. And a bunch of us at CoachSource went ahead and got our own PCCs. And periodically we'll run PCC trainings for coaches of ours who would like to pursue that. Because there's a lot of us who've been in the field a long time and just never did it. So I jokingly say we're like old dogs that need to learn some new tricks. And it was a very worthwhile process. I'm very glad that we had done it, actually. So I have some more on that too, Ram, when I get to the part about what companies want when they're hiring a coach. In fact, I can go there now. That's pretty interesting stuff. That would actually be a nice segue to that. So let me go there. Yeah. So it says topic 4. I'm just going out of order, but that's okay. What do executives most want when they want to hire a coach? So for those of you in the audience, why don't you think about that for a quick second. See if you can think of what would be the top choice you think an executive would say when they're hiring a coach. It could be your business experience. It could be your credentialing. It could be your ability to build rapport. It might be your location. I've given away a few hints. So now that I've done that, hopefully you've picked something, one of those or something else that you think an executive would tell us they most want when they hire a coach. And now let's take a look at least the top 4, and then I'll open it up for more. The top 4 choices. So the top choice, as you could imagine, 97% of the executives are picking. They basically get to pick everything that they thought was important, and they could pick as many as they'd like. So nearly all of the executives say that they would most want, first and foremost, a coach for which they feel like they could build trust and comfort, and they would have rapport with each other. So it's that element of chemistry that is so important. And I've seen some other research, and if there's any clinical psychologists here, they could tell this better than me. But I've seen research to show from therapy that it can often be that alliance between the therapist and the client who which can predict a certain percentage of the positive outcomes of therapy. And so therefore, it probably is not really any different in coaching. It really is that chemistry that matters. And so at Coach Source, whenever we're sending coaches out to meet a possible executive, we'll usually always send about 2, 3, 4 coaches out and tell the executive that we feel they would all be well qualified to coach this executive, but it's really that personal chemistry that's so important here that we would like the executive to determine through their one-to-one meeting, like a one-to-one interview or so. Second top choice is simply how experienced is this coach? You know, how long have they been coaching? Not necessarily how they've been trained, but I think that's part of it. But you know, are they a good coach? Are they good at coaching? You know, at Coach Source, we like to see someone's been coaching at least 5 years, and 10 or more is even better. We like to see that someone's been on their own for at least 2 years, because we feel that you have a better chance of surviving as a coach if you've already shown that you've been able to be on your own for at least 2 years. And this one as Coach Source is a little harder for us to determine, because we don't actually sit in a room and watch someone coach and then decide whether we think they're a good coach or not. But we're going to lean on other indicators, such as how they were trained, how long they've been coaching, what levels they coach at, and so forth, as a way to determine their experience and skills as a coach. So that's number 2. Number 3 is business experience. And this one is a tricky one, because I wrote a blog piece on this. I get executives all the time who want a coach that have heavy business experience, that they have line management experience or C-level experience or country manager or whatnot, that they've done the job that the current executive is doing, but perhaps at an even bigger level. And the reason why this one is tricky is I will say it's not always common for a coach to actually have done all of those things and then left all of that and then went into coaching with getting proper training and experience and so forth. I find sometimes business experience and coaching experience can offset each other a little bit, because you might have heavy business experience, but you haven't coached a whole lot yet. So it's like this. Or many coaches have been coaching a really long time, but they didn't necessarily come from a major business background. So we're always kind of trying to find that right balance there. And so nonetheless, our clients are always interested in coaches with business experience. And many of you on the line have noticed, for whatever reason, Ram is a great example of someone who had wonderful business experience, important business experience, and then moved into coaching. And for some reason, our network in India, we have many coaches like this, which we don't have as often anywhere else, but coaches who've actually had very important roles in business and then eventually moved into coaching. We don't see that as often anywhere else, but for some reason in India we do, which is fabulous. And then the fourth preference is a really interesting one as well. This is a coach who actually has a lot of experience in the area that the leader hopes to improve in, dealing with specific leadership challenges. So the company or the leader will say, the person needs to improve in prioritization, for example. And so we go into our network at Coach Source, and we can tell immediately which coaches have specialty in this area of prioritization. And sometimes I can even say, actually, you should talk to this coach, because not only do they coach on this topic all of the time, they've actually written a book on this topic, and they do speaking on this topic, and so on and so forth. So they're real specialists. And Marshall has liked to say, become the world's leading expert on something. And that really helps, because if I can tell our client this person really is a major expert in this area, I think you should be talking to them as a possible coach. The executive really, really prefers that. So those are our top 4. Let me show you the rest, and then I know we're going to have a few questions. Area of specialty as a coach is actually similar to the one I just mentioned. Match with our culture has to do with matching the culture of the company. Being recommended by someone else is next up. Industry experience, cost, what the coach cost, where the coach is located, whether they have a certification, an advanced degree, and then finally, whether they're certified in a specific tool. Now, you look at this and you'll say, wow, certification is way down there. Actually, every time we run the survey, it's way down there, I must say. But this year, it is actually past advanced degree. Normally, advanced degree is above certification, and the two have flip-flopped. And even though it's way down there, we find that all of this is quite necessary. It's quite important. And in some cases, it's a basic minimum. It's just that when an executive is picking, they're going to stack up some of these other items on top because they'll feel that they're more important. But it doesn't mean coaching certification or advanced degree aren't important. It's just they don't place at the top with the others. Let me show you a comparison to the other groups, and then I know you'll have questions. So the 4 groups are answering this question I've been showing you. And the top 2 are the same across the board: rapport, ability to build rapport, or experience and skill as a coach. Those 2 across the board from all groups are the top 2. Business experience still shows up quite important from all groups, a little more important from the executives than from the other groups, as you can see here. So executives do overrate perhaps business experience. And then this one on specific leadership challenges shows up for everybody as well. Matching the culture of our company, you can see that here. That's more important for the person managing coaching at a company, and more important for internal coaches who generally know the culture of that company very well, but was less important from executives or external coaches. And finally, just some of the lower items. The instrument or tool. So this is if you've certified in a tool like Hogan or something like that. That does generally place last. Advanced degree shows up last among everybody. Certification as well from executives and external coaches. It was a little more important for internal coaches and for organizations. So I have given you a lot to chew on. Ram, I think we could probably take some more questions, and I'll back up to this slide as well. Questions or even responses, or Ram, this might be, you've probably seen a graph like this from us before, but yeah, curious your reactions as well when you see this.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me, and I think some of the questions also sort of come onto this topic, even now, I asked this question of you about 5 odd years ago, at which point in time, as you said, advanced degree was higher rated than professional certification. And even now it's pretty lowly rated in terms of about whatever numbers that you have here, about 15. The coaching certification is probably somewhere around 12 or whatever. So in your own discussions with I know that you keep meeting industry leaders and you are in regular touch with them from companies and so on. What is it that leads to a professional certification, which every coach worth his salt thinks very highly about, that I'm a PCC or an MCC or whatever kind of a coach I am, and the companies don't seem to care very much about that. And there was somebody who's asked a question, does it mean that the companies are looking for mentors instead of coaches, or whatever that might mean? So what do you think is the answer?
Well, I'm going to say something a bit controversial, but I've said it before, so I'm sure people can handle it. For many years, I told you that we didn't really even know about ICF, and then we were just doing our thing, and then we would get coaches who certified and would apply to us, and they would say, I'm an ICF this and that, and I've been trained at this place or that place. But what we found is they sometimes lacked some of these other things. They very often had no business experience. They didn't have an advanced degree. They actually hadn't coached a whole lot. They might have been more of a life coach than an executive coach. Those were the early years. It's not like that now. But for quite a while, sometimes if someone came to us with ICF all over their information, it actually didn't necessarily help their case with us. It actually could have hurt their case, surprisingly. But that has changed, absolutely has changed. But having said that, so companies just didn't see the point in the ICF or anything like that. They wanted these other criteria as being much more important. Now, that's changed for some of the reasons I mentioned. And also, interestingly, I have observed that the person who runs coaching inside a company, who manages their coaching practice, is more increasingly likely to have been a certified coach themselves. So maybe they're an internal coach and then they've been put in charge of the coaching program. And so since they're a certified coach themselves, they might be more likely to prefer a certified coach. And also it is a good marker for a company who just needs to know, at least, does this person, what could we do to validate whether this person could be a good coach? And something like a certification would be a decent way to do that. To answer that one question, I don't know that they're saying they want mentors instead of coaches. They do say they still want coaching. It's just they didn't find at the time the certification to be as important.
But are you saying, therefore, today that situation has changed? Because one of the things you asked me about India, what I see happening is 10 years ago when I entered the scene, very briefly, I was the 5th PCC in India. 2 of them already moved out from India to US, so I was one of the 3. And there was absolutely no awareness, like you said, that was 20-something years ago in the US, but in India it was just about 10 years ago. And today, over a period of time, we have trained, at least our own institution, about 600 over coaches. And many of the organizations have today coaches at PCC level who are either CHROs or senior L&D managers and so on. So they have a much greater awareness of what they're looking for when they talk about coaching. So that situation has changed. But I find still in the US that there's a bit of that conundrum, as it were, that somebody had asked a question about business experience. Is it really relevant to coaching? Obviously, the companies who hire us, they think so. For us as coaches, we believe that it's not about business experience or expertise or whatever it may be. It's our ability to explore and be present and so on. So where does the truth lie?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was presenting these set of slides over at Google, and some people may know David Peterson is a well-known name in our field of coaching, and he runs Google's coaching practice. And we were discussing this very point about the business experience, because as a coaching manager, he gets the same issue where these Google leaders are asking for a coach who's done all this great stuff from a business perspective. And David will say to them, okay, can you want people with great business experience? Can you name some people that you think have this great business experience that you're asking for? And they'll go ahead and name a few people. And then David will say, okay, great. So now, would you want any of those people to be your coach? And the answer is always, oh, absolutely not. No way would I want them to be my coach. So that David's immediately shown right then and there that the heavy business experience doesn't necessarily always mean that someone's going to be a great coach, and is able to kind of steer them off that preference for a heavy business experience. So, there's always a tricky piece there to navigate a little bit. I think it might be just a comfort level that an executive has, that this person would understand my world. This person, it might even really be related to the building rapport or trust. Is if this person has walked in my shoes in the past, they would be more likely to understand the world that I'm currently in faster. That might be what the executive is thinking when they're asking for that business experience. But, you know, I feel like Coach Source, I don't know that you have to have done that person's job at all. I don't think you have to be a great coach. Of course not. But I do think, of course, that a coach should be able to relate to the executive and certainly have enough business acumen to be able to understand what they're talking about. So if they're talking about certain elements of their business, you know, that you generally could kind of grasp the basics of what it is they're describing quickly so that you understand the situation. I think sort of some level of business acumen is certainly important to helping yourself as a coach.
Following that, Brian, one of the things as a Coach Source course that I have noticed over a period of years is that it's very important for the client to, though it rates pretty low in this priority, about proximity or location. In fact, I found that to be a major problem because I was shuttling between 2 or 3 countries, and it was invariably about if you want a coach in Silicon Valley company, are you in California? Are you able to come over? Or Chicago, and so on and so forth. So for many people here who are like countries where they probably have aspirations of being able to virtually coach people, what do you think is a trend that is happening?
Yeah, so you can see proximity is down on our list there, but I will say the reason why Coach Source has 1,100 coaches around the world is because the first request we usually get is, do you have a coach in such and so place? And we started to learn that it would probably be a good idea to have coaches in as many places as we could, so that when those requests come in, we would have a coach in that place. In a different part of our research study, we did look at how coaching is conducted. And more often than not, it is conducted face-to-face, but there's still definitely a high number of sessions done virtually. And we asked then, what did you think was most effective? And there was a preference for face-to-face coaching. Now, whether that's entirely true or not, I'm sure could be researched, or probably has been researched in our field, because there can be pros and cons to each. My preference, if I could, is if I could at least have one session face-to-face with someone, especially early. I feel like we can build some good rapport and so forth, and that would help with rapport building, and then we can do more virtual over time. And so if possible, that's what I would prefer to do. And, you know, again, I mean, with our clients at Coach Source, if they need a coach in a certain city, we do have lots of coaches, so we have a higher chance of getting them someone face-to-face, and I think the clients do like that.
Yeah. So one of the things I remember in a conference that you had when I was there a couple of years ago, you talked about trends. One of those trends was about internal coaching, that more and more companies are going for internal coaches, possibly partly out of the increasing cost of external coaches, and possibly because of certain other advantages. So what's happening in that space, and what kind of people? Some of the questions are about, do HR business partners, do they make the best coaches, or is it line managers who make the best coaches? How do companies select and train these coaches?
I actually have, I only have 2 slides on internals just in front of me at the moment that's easy to share here. We did a whole section in our research on internal coaching because it's definitely on the increase. More companies are investing in internal coaching. And I see a question here in the question panel too about why would a company use internals versus externals? And cost is generally one of the biggest drivers there. But it could also be because internals know the company culture better. They're more available, perhaps. and so forth. And you can see here in our research that companies in the next 2 years are planning somewhat of an increase of internal coaches, no decrease, although some companies just don't believe in this whole internal coaching thing, of course, as well. And that all the groups that we met predicted an increase in the use of internal coaching over the next 3 to 5 years, especially internal coaches who said this. There's pros and cons, that are often debated. You have someone that's there that knows the culture, that knows some of the elements of the dynamics, but there are some big challenges as to whether could they be seen to protect confidentiality as much as we need. Could they be seen as credible? Sometimes just because you're inside a place, you're not seen as credible as an expert coming in. But the biggest challenge we found for internal coaches at many companies we surveyed is internal coaches actually very often have another job to do. So they're most commonly, they are usually someone more in an HR kind of background, leadership development, HR, organization development. And they're more likely to have a certification than an external coach, believe it or not. Maybe a little less likely to have an advanced degree. And but the biggest challenge they have is they don't have enough time to do this coaching because they have their normal job to do. So they're usually doing their normal job and then giving people to coach on top of that. And there isn't necessarily a reduction in their normal job responsibilities to then start doing coaching. So the biggest challenge internals have is they're overloaded and don't have a lot of time to do the job. So I visited a few companies lately that have decided if we're going to use internal coaches, let's have them only coach and not do anything else. And so we'll hire an external coach, have them work for us as an internal coach, and then all they're going to do is coach for us the whole time. And there's an interesting case study about EY, Ernst & Young. They actually have a fleet, a cadre. I don't remember the number. I want to say it's at least 15 or maybe 20 full-time coaches. And they only coach all day. That's the only thing they do. They do it mostly by phone because it's a huge company. And they have a caseload of sometimes at least 40 people they're coaching at any one time, 50, 60. I've heard it as high as 70 at any one time that they're coaching, which would sound crazy to me. I don't know about you all, but I think that would be insane to try and even 40 is a lot for me to imagine trying to coach at the same, have kind of keep track of where 40 different people are. But EY seems to really feel like this is a great investment and a great commitment towards coaching. So Ram, there's a couple things there about internal coaching. You may have questions or responses to that, but it's definitely a trend that's on the increase for sure.
Is there ever an issue of confidentiality as an ethical issue in internal coaches?
Absolutely, and I think it would be important for all parties to be very clear on what are those rules, that everyone knows up front exactly how do those rules work. I would say for the vast majority of internal coaches, they would share the same confidentiality elements that all the rest of us would, of course, but there's still a trickiness, a dual role sometimes that happens. I was talking to one the other day who does internal coaching, but then she's on the team that for talent management or talent reviews, where they're discussing various leaders and what the company thinks might be their future next positions and things. So now this internal coach who knows the leader really well is also in a role where they are making recommendations about whether certain leaders should be considered for higher level of promotion or whatnot. And that would be very tricky because the coach might advocate for their leader who they've grown an affinity towards, or the coach might know some things that no one else knows, that would give the coach pause to recommend that leader for higher position. And those would be very tricky. I wouldn't want to be in that situation, but internal coaches can be. And that's something that they have to figure out how exactly they should address those.
Thanks, Brian. Given that we don't have that much more time, probably about another 10 minutes, are there other developmental areas that you see changing this landscape that you would like to cover from what you found in the survey?
Yeah, so I think I'll end on one of my favorite parts of the survey, which has to do with, let's look at all the trends that we studied and just figure out what's most likely over the next 3 to 5 years. I've sort of hinted at some of them. On the list you see now, you'll actually see one of the top choices from organizations on what they think is most likely over the next 3 to 5 years. And you also see one of the lowest choices of what companies believe to be the case. So if you look at that list and go ahead and guess your highest and guess your lowest choice. And now I'll show you what we found from the people who manage coaching. So the one about leadership development programs and adding coaching comes in top place. And we do a fair amount of this. I was surprised it came number one. I'll be honest. I know it's a trend. I just didn't realize it would be the top trend of all the ones that we had given to companies to consider. But, that's a good trend. The leadership development program where people come in for a few days and there's various elements of the program, but then we're going to add coaching onto it, either starting then or starting thereafter for the next several months to reinforce the learning. So that's a really interesting one to see, number one. Number two has been around quite a while. I know it's been prevalent. I just didn't think it would come in number two, which is the idea of teaching managers more coaching skills. Sometimes it's called creating a coaching culture, which I think actually to create a culture, you need a lot more than just teaching coaching skills, but it's still kind of the desire to have more coaching taking place within the organization. So that came in number two. The number three we saw earlier, which is just greater use of external coaches. I'll highlight a few others here. You see team coaching here. Someone asked about that earlier. And I think team coaching is probably definitely an emergent trend that still needs a little work in definition, because when I talk to clients, when they say we want team coaching and I ask them to describe what it is they need, I hear different things. Sometimes I hear typical traditional team development. Sometimes I hear leaders who are all going to go through coaching but do it together as a team, and other variations as well. But at CoachSource, we are launching a team coaching practice, as it were, over this next year, because we're seeing more and more requests for team coaching. A few others of interest. So you see millennial leaders is not as high as you would think. Actually, other groups in our survey answered that one with much higher frequency than the organization practice managers here did. And those of you who picked artificial intelligence as the last choice on the prior slide were correct. And in fact, that's not uncommon for any group I speak to. Oh, sorry, hold on. FedEx just walked in. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. Brian. Sorry, I'm on a webinar. Sorry about that, folks. Artificial intelligence, last place, but there's been increasing discussions in conferences I go to, just watching for this and wondering, could there be a day that artificial intelligence replaces us or replaces part of what we can do? I find that hard to believe. I will tell you that. And I sort of feel like, we're we're wired to be in relationship and community with each other as humans, and that would probably be our preference, but I don't know, who knows? Might as well put it on the radar screen for people. And so finally, if you compare the different groups with each other, you actually see some similarities, because these leader as coach training and leadership development program shows up for all of the groups. But internal coaches had, of course, a higher proclivity towards internal coaching. Internals and externals both picked millennial leaders too, with a lot more frequency than the organization practice managers as well. The trends part of our research we really enjoyed, and I think we will repeat it every maybe 2 years or so, and start to always have a regular observation on trends in our industry, which we think would be very important for all of us to always be aware of. With that, more questions.
Sorry, Brian, what was curious for me was you had separated team and group coaching. So in the eyes of the corporate leaders and others, what exactly do they see as a difference?
We see them differently as well. Team is focused on a team that has responsibilities as a team. So they're an intact team that are interdependent, that are reliant upon each other. And so you're conducting coaching within that environment. There's, again, debate in our field as to, are you working, intervening only at the team level and what the team does to be more effective as a team, or are you intervening more at the individual level? So you're still doing one-to-one coaching, but there's some coordination among the team. In any case, the bigger answer to your question is we would see that as the necessity that they are a team that has to work interdependently. Group coaching would perhaps be more of a cohort that are arranged into a group, but they don't necessarily have interdependent responsibilities at an organization. They might not even work for the same organization. They may be a cohort based on other criteria. They might all be working on a similar area for development or be at a similar level of leadership. So they are a learning. One of the ideas is that you could do group coaching for people who have similar areas of development that they're working on. So I jokingly say you put all the people who are bad listeners in one group and see what will happen to the poor facilitator trying to run it. But yeah, I would see some differences between these two. But I would say again that there is increasing debate, since they are the emergent trends. I don't know if our field has totally properly agreed on definitions for both of these.
So finally, almost at the top of the hour, Brian, I think one of the most important takeaways that you could provide people here, mainly all credential holders and many of them ICF, and what you have said about that credentialing doesn't rate that high on the priority ladder of industries and business experience and so on and so forth. So how can a coach who has the competencies, who has coaching experience, but perhaps not as much of business experience, if they were to go in front of whoever selects the decision maker in an organization, what is it that they can do to impress them?
Well, so maybe one doesn't have all that business experience, but if you've been coaching a little while, you do have a lot of experience with similar leaders or in a certain industry or with a certain functional area. So for example, here's an example. I have coaches who in their former career, they might have been in finance. They might have been accountants or something like that. And so then they specialize in working with leaders in finance organizations or finance departments and so forth. And they do have that experience. And so they might as well highlight that. Or they've worked with a lot of leaders So here in Silicon Valley, we may have coaches that have worked with leaders in startups, but maybe they didn't start something up themselves, but they worked with a lot of startup leaders and have knowledge of what these types of leaders face. And that right there would be very useful to an organization. I also think that building rapport piece is not to be underestimated at all. I have met hundreds of coaches, not thousands, over the years. And there's something about a way a coach presents themselves, and when you meet with them, if you just feel comfortable and feel like you could trust them and so forth, it's really important. If you feel like that they're good communicators, that they can express what they're thinking or ask great questions, that's all incredibly important. And a company is going to ascertain that when they're meeting with you, as I do when I meet with coaches. Some coaches I notice can get, maybe they're getting nervous near me, which they shouldn't, because I feel like I'm pretty friendly. But I'm thinking if they're getting kind of nervous around me, that means they're getting very nervous with an executive. So there's something about that personal connection that really, really helps make someone, a buyer of coaching, to feel more comfortable with that coach.
Yeah. Get a leader that you coach to give you a testimonial, and then from there move on, something like that. So one of the questions that has come up again and again is, if somebody wants to get your report free, how do they do that?
Free, yeah. So here at this, I've just put up the link. It is for pay there at the moment. If there's anyone on the line that actually works for a big company that does business with CoachSource, you actually can also get it for free, but your company would contact our CoachSource contact for the free copy of the research. However, I have a blog, and I'm actually releasing a chapter every other month for free, the whole thing. So by the end of the year, the entire thing will be free to everybody. We've released the first two chapters. Well, it's technically the introduction and chapter 1 have already been released, and they're on our blog. And then we'll continue to do that over time. So that would be a great way to, and that's the full version. That's everything we did. So over time, you can definitely get your hands on that. You can be notified about that if you come to our website and register for our newsletter. That's how you'll know every time we do it, unless you want to just keep an eye on the blog. And I'd love to connect with anybody on LinkedIn or Twitter or anything like that. I'd love to stay in touch. And every time I see something interesting about our field, I'll try and put it up on those platforms as well. Trends that I might see and things like that.
And finally, if any of the people who are in this program would like to approach CoachSource for potentially listing themselves, would that be okay for them to contact CoachSource and say that they listened to you on this webinar, they are very interested?
Yes, Ram has been great about sending us folks that he's trained and so forth. At our website, you'll see the place where you can apply, and you come and look at the criteria that we have, which really aren't too different than what you just saw in the presentation. Look at those criteria, and assuming you meet them, or most all of them, feel free to consider applying, and you can certainly in the cover note let them know how you heard of us and whatnot. So that would be wonderful. We would love that.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Thank you very much for being here. Magda, would you like to do the honors in closing the session?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ram. That was, as usual, amazing. And I'm learning a ton. I hope everyone else is as well. We are finished for today, but we are back again tomorrow with 2 exciting speakers. I see that Michael has posted the link to the full schedule, so it's already in the notes. I did want to mention one thing. Brian talked about the role of AI and in coaching. We actually have 2 interesting sessions coming up exploring that question. One of them is tomorrow. It's about the virtual reality use in coaching. So that's with David Tinker. I invite you to come check that out. Should be quite fascinating. And then on Sunday, we have Matt Barney, who has built a business around applications of AI in coaching. It's not being coached by a robot, so it's not that crazy, but it is quite interesting. And I think you guys will enjoy it quite a bit. So please check back in. Same link, same registration, and we'll see you back here tomorrow, hopefully.
Yeah. And the recordings, people have asked about it. They will also be on the website. Yeah.
Yes. So recordings, we'll be putting them up as we get them edited, but please expect a link to all the recordings in your May 15th email, which will also include information on how to claim your education credits for these sessions.
Thanks a lot, Magda. Thanks a lot, Brian. And we will always be having you again and again on this forum so that you can
be honored.
All our people. Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Take
you
care.
all. God bless.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All of you. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.